Buckle your thermal breeches, traveler, because tonight we're trudging straight into the frosted armpit of medieval Europe, the side they never bother to paint onto tapestry calendars. Forget stately banquets and dragons with unions. This is the real winter, the one that howls through crooked huts and tries its very best every single night to turn hard-working peasants into crunchy human popsicles. No shiny armor here, no epic cavalry charge, just smoke-choked cottages, bread turning into geological specimens, and wolves pacing the tree line like jerks at an all-you-can-eat buffet who've just discovered the heat lamps went out. If listening to slow-cooked misery stories fluffed up with extra jokes helps your brain relax, you can tap the like button, but only if it actually makes you feel cozy, not out of pity. Slide down into the comments afterward and scribble your coordinates plus whatever ungodly hour you hit play. Somehow it's comforting to imagine other bleary-eyed night owls tuning in from their own little bungalows of insomnia. Now dim whatever lamp you own. Coax your fan into that perfect white noise hum. Wrap yourself in something that smells less like goat than you do, and let's begin. Or more accurately, let's shiver in tandem through a season that doesn't merely test people, it files a formal petition to end them. You don't need a calendar to know winter's skulking your way. Your bones send advance notice first. Each joint stiffens like day-old porridge, creaking louder than a church door that missed its weekly oiling. The sky catches on quick, trading in its friendly blue for a taunting shade of reluctant dishwater. Animals who consistently rate higher than humans on the medieval weather prediction scale look at you with a polite good luck sucker stare before silently nominating you as the family's emergency food supply. Autumn doesn't leave, it just slinks backward out of the room, hiding its brightly colored leaves behind its back until there's nothing left but twigs and social awkwardness. The wind, previously content to rustle tabards, starts poking its icy fingers through every gap in your cottage, auditing your insulation like a tax collector in a mood. Chickens quiet down. Dogs quit barking at every nothing burger rustle and instead listen, ears twitching to the real predators creeping closer. That's your sign to start walking faster, because standing still now hurts more than smithing shoes barefoot. Winter doesn't grand entrance with a howling blizzard. It shows up like an unpaid bill, quiet, dull, and carrying impact fees. Your denial phase kicks in automatically. You keep wearing the same tunic from October, but now you tie a cloak over it that has more holes than moral loopholes in canon law. You promise yourself you'll mend it later, but the needle is bent. The thread ran out 2 summers ago, and your fingers are too numb to coordinate anything more precise than a desperate prayer. Everyone brags about how prepared they'll be next year, as if preparedness isn't just wishful thinking wearing boots. There's always a roof patch you skipped, a firewood stack you meant to double, or last row of parsnips still clinging to the garden like orphans begging for salt. Instead of finishing those chores, you find yourself at dusk stuffing straw between wall planks that look ashamed of themselves, draping ragged cloth across the doorway, and scooting every bed within spitting distance of the hearth, even Uncle Gain, who smells like damp sheep and whispers transactional nightmares in his sleep. Fires are precious. You don't keep one burning all day unless you're royalty or suicidal in your firewood math. Flames are for twilight, for cooking, and for that 1 hour when the family tries on cheerfulness like a costume. The rest of the time, heat comes from motion, from layered rags, and from piling siblings on top of each other like still-breathing sandbags. Animals get invited inside, but only the warm ones. It's nature's version of a VIP lounge. Chickens huddle under benches, the goat stands there exhaling used grass fragrance onto your pillow, and the cow ruminates in the lean-to, complaining about real estate prices. You just pretend not to notice the smell, because complaining uses breath, and breath equals heat loss. The outside world turns into a frozen obstacle course. Paths that were ankle-deep bogs last week stiffen into jagged ridges, eager to snap a bone. The water bucket forms a lid of ice you break each morning with the only ladle that hasn't splintered, while cursing loud enough to thaw it by sound waves alone. The sky stays stuck in a sad, low-hanging gray like it lost all motivation to climb any higher. You glare at it, as though clouds carry secret messages. They don't, unless the message is, you're screwed. Town life slows but somehow still requires speed. Folks march faster, talk shorter, laugh never. The priest's homilies grow darker, nothing like being reminded that God invented winter to keep everyone humble while your toes decide which ones to amputate first. You try to imagine a version of Almighty who might consider warmer pedagogical methods, but maybe that's heresy. Eventually, snow falls, at first just a delicate powder like God spilt flour across the thatch. Sounds pretty until you realize it's the Earth's sock drawer slamming shut. From that moment you're locked inside Mother Nature's ice chest. Nothing new will sprout until the sun has an existential breakthrough. Whatever you stashed away is all that stands between your family and an entirely unwanted fasting retreat. Inventory becomes religion. You count firewood bundles, grain sacks, shriveled turnips, and egg tallies. Spoiler, the hens are on strike. You sew until your hands bleed, scrape soot for tomorrow's fuel, stir ashes hoping you missed a coal. Too much silence and your brain suggests stupid ideas like, what if we re-roofed today? Or, maybe bark tastes okay if you stew it twice. The pig grows quiet, never a comforting omen. The chickens, they've unionized under the table. The cow gives the same amount of milk whether you feed her optimism or actual hay. Outside, tracks appear where no tracks should, and Uncle Gain mutters that wolves discuss recipes in those woods. Through it all there's a bleak camaraderie. Everyone's equally miserable. Victory becomes a pot of stew that doesn't flavor like utter despair, blasting toes back to slightly warm for 10 minutes, or a day when the wind decides to harass the next village over. Laugh too loudly at such small triumphs and someone will hiss, "Quiet, we've just begun," as if winter hears boastful peasants and decides to level up. Then come the Little Ice Age years when winter acts like an overachiever. The Rhine freezes into a skating rink/market square until the ice rents down the middle and dumps half the merchants into very brisk lessons on buoyancy. Bad harvests follow heavier rains. Europe tips from cold into full famine. People resort to, let's call it creative protein sourcing. Folks whisper terrible rumors, cannibalism, infanticide, while stirring bowls of something distinctly unrumor-like. But defeat isn't official until the chores collapse. Firewood is constant agony. Trees don't want to surrender. Axes play favorites with your shins, and the stack outside vanishes faster than your neighbor swears he's not borrowing. Even wet logs you curse into submission, hiss in retaliation, and half smother the fire. At least the smoke kills the lice. You haul water over ice slick as a bishop's conscience. Laundry, break river ice, dunk garments, knead with ash until your knuckles go white as the snow, and hang them on a line where they transform instantly into frozen ghosts. Each evening, everyone squeezes around the hearth like sinners at confession, chewing sludge that's been reheated so many times it qualifies as a relic. Somebody tries telling a ghost story. It's always about a traveler freezing on the road as if you needed fresh material for nightmares. Eventually someone has to run to the privy outside, sprinting across the yard and refusing to glance at the darkness too long in case it returns the favor. Yet winter isn't pure misery. It offers rhythm, chop wood, mend cloak, stoke fire, repeat. Movement substitutes for happiness. Small victories pile up. Hey, the goat didn't die, or the rat didn't eat the last rind of cheese. You learn each creak in the wall's vocabulary, each draft's boundary, and you discover that you're a tiny bit stronger, or at least not dead yet. But winter isn't done. It diseases you too. Someone sneezes and now half the family coughs up parts they didn't know were detachable. Remedies range from bleeding, because less blood, fewer complaints, to herbal stews that taste like boiled pessimism. A barber surgeon shows up with a saw and more enthusiasm than hygiene. You start writing your will on the inside of your eyelids. Some survive, many don't. Frozen graves line churchyards. In deep snow, bodies are tucked into barns or snowbanks to await softer ground. Come spring, meltwater reveals a boot here, a doll there. Nobody speaks of it. Grief stays frozen behind the sternum. Slowly, soggy spring creeps in. Mud replaces snow, but that only means you sink instead of slip. The food stores are empty, tools broken, spirits cracked. Yet somehow, green shoots appear. First weed, then barley. You feel an emotion approximating hope, though you don't trust it any farther than you'd fling a frozen turnip. You patch the roof again, not because you believe it'll hold, but because trying means you're still in the game. Faith becomes practical. You pray not for comfort, but for the livestock to stay unchewed, for the rats to land in someone else's shack, for the next winter to be merciful, or at least too lazy to bother. Year after year, winter returns.
You're never ready, but you're never completely beaten either. Survival here isn't triumph, it's simply existing when spring finally staggers in, just barely alive enough to do the chores all over again. And that, friend, is how a medieval peasant measures success. One more sunrise with ribs still inside the body. Now pull your cloak tighter. There's plenty more misery, and a few badly timed jokes before we're done.
The first rule of Medieval Survival Club is simple. Never forget your place on the cosmic ladder, because someone with a fancier hat will be thrilled to remind you. There's the manor lord, strutting around on a pinto that has shinier shoes than you, who owns your field, the dirt in your fingernails, and the rights to any swear words you accidentally mutter while plowing. On market days he rides past, armor jingling like an obnoxious wind chime, and you practice the half-bow, half-curtsy that says, "Good morning, sire. Please don't notice that my tithe is mostly pebbles this year." If for some reckless reason you test your vocal cords with backtalk, congratulations, you've unlocked the stocks, nature's original standing desk, but with added public humiliation and enough splinters to qualify as a new plague. The villagers kindly gather to heckle, pelt you with root vegetables, and politely debate whether your offense calls for rutabaga or the deluxe turnip upgrade. After a night of cramping in that portable picture frame, you emerge shaped like a question mark and determined never to address authority again, at least not without a 20-foot buffer and an apology baked into every sentence. Then there's the priest, dressed head to toe in garments tailored from guilt itself, who can weaponize a raised eyebrow better than any sword. He knows if you skip mass, he knows if you ducked out during the credo, he probably knows whatever you dreamt last night too, because your cousin snitched. When he intones Latin, you may not grasp the meaning, but you can feel the subtext. Behave, or hell's waiting with a temperature setting even your hearth can't imitate. And whatever coins you have left after the Lord's rent still need to jiggle into the tithe box. Fail to cough up the copper and watch how quickly a Sunday sermon morphs into a public audit of your spiritual arrears. Punishment isn't always as dignified as wooden bondage. The scold's bridle exists, a steel muzzle with a tongue-shredding plate, perfect for any villager who enjoys conversation. Women get the accessory most often, proof that medieval engineers could design advanced silencing technology centuries before anyone needed a mute button. Imagine being locked into an iron gag so you can meditate on humility while spectators admire how the spit drips stylishly from the corners of your mouth. If you're extra unlucky, they parade you around town like a macabre carnival float. Moral of the story, practice the lost art of thinking loudly but saying nothing. None of these humiliations halt the wolf population pacing the tree line. Those gray-coated accountants of the forest keep track of every child straying too far with the chamber pot. You trudge for firewood, hear a twig snap, and suddenly imagine your obituary. Devoured while collecting kindling, survived by half a loaf of bread and a goat that never liked him anyway. So you sing terribly off-key as you haul logs, hoping music functions as predator deterrent. It doesn't, but at least the wolves pause to judge your pitch, buying you 10 extra seconds to flee. Inside your wall of wattled regret, rodents continue their renaissance fair. A rat does parkour across the rafters and lands inside the oat barrel, surfacing with a kernel like it just won a carnival prize. Cats are supposed to handle this, yet your tabby is unionized, demands extra milk before it'll even glare in the rat's direction. You compromise by bargaining half a herring for pest control services, but the cat drafts a counter-proposal for full herring, front-loaded with belly scratches on weekends. In the meantime, you devise homemade traps out of string, desperation, and the faint hope that gravity is on your side. Sickness visits next, wearing the aroma of damp straw and regret. One day you sneeze, the next day you're leaking fluid from every human vent and the village healer is rummaging through dusty bundles of suspicious herbs. She advises a poultice of moss, stale beer, and a prayer to whichever saint handles joint pain this week. You agree, partly because there's no second opinion and partly because the barber surgeon's wagon just creaked into town carrying fewer bandages than saw blades. Better to smell like moss than leave your arm behind as payment. Through it all, the calendar trudges onward, oblivious. March arrives on paper, but outside you're still starring in Ice Age 7, the thaw that wouldn't. You remind yourself that mud technically counts as progress. When the first truly warm breeze sneaks under the door, it's like somebody invented happiness. You fling the shutter open, only to discover your field looks like a battlefield. The plow is rusted,
One of the oxen has learned to impersonate a statue out of pure laziness, and every tool handle cracked over winter like ancient pottery. Still, you inhale that earthy scent of new life, equal parts hope and decomposing turnip, and decide maybe another year is doable after all. Soon the hens lay an egg that doesn't freeze solid before sunrise. Someone strums a lute with only 3 strings but enough determination to sound almost like music. A neighbor gifts a loaf not petrified into masonry. You dare to laugh, very quietly, lest the skies mistake mirth for arrogance and drop hail the size of pullets. Even Uncle Ganna mutters less about debts and more about planting beans. Yet you never fully relax. The trauma of cold months lingers in your shoulders. When a late frost nips the lettuce one morning, panic flares like a match in dry hay. You arc between terror and relief until midsummer finally rolls over, hot and generous, and at last you exhale a season's worth of clenched dread. Then you start counting sacks again, because winter is, statistically speaking, already on its way. Survival here is less adulting and more existing inside a looped side quest. Gather, mend, pray, obey, endure. The victory condition never changes. It simply reads, "Not dead yet," and so the cycle spins. You hide a precious log for the coming chill. You whisper a promise to next January's self that you'll finish patching the roof properly this year. And you eye the young piglet you've been fattening and think, "Don't get too attached, buddy." Between chores you steal moments, watch fireflies hover, feel grass under toes not wrapped in rags, dare to imagine a future where your children might inherit a house with fewer holes than a fishing net. Night falls warm for once. You look up at a sky stuffed with stars so bright they could guide lost souls. Somewhere in that dark sprawl, kings debate policy, merchants scheme, and priests rehearse sermons about humility. But out here in your battered corner of Christendom, all you want is tomorrow. One more sunrise, one more bowl of slightly less watery pottage, one more reason for the goat to mind its manners. Because every extra day is another laugh the wolves didn't get, another tiny victory over cold, hunger, authority, and the uncooperative plot twist that is medieval life itself. Summer generosity never lasts. One week you're arguing with your kids about whose turn it is to fan the soup so it will cool, and 3 sunsets later the evenings are already tiptoeing toward crisp. A single gust rattles the thatch at night, and everyone in the cottage instantly side-eyes the ceiling like it just whispered, "Remember me?" You try to dismiss the chill as an overeager breeze, but the pea soup inside your pot develops that "oh dear it's September" skin before you finish ladling it. Geese bank south in a hurry. The cat sheds enough fur to knit a second cat, which you briefly consider doing because extra warmth is extra warmth. You promise yourself you'll chop more wood this year. You have the same conversation every August, sober, resolute, practically heroic. Then a traveling peddler trundles by with ribbons and salt, and you trade half a day's chopping time for gossip and garish cloth because if you die frozen, at least you died accessorized. Procrastination is the one luxury nobody taxes. By the time you do swing the axe, the sun is half done with its shift, and you're hacking at logs while mosquitoes draft evacuation plans from your ankles. Everything becomes an amateur weather prophecy. The barley heads bow too early, bad sign. The elderberry bush produced exactly 3 berries, worse sign. Aunt Hedwig's joints click louder than last year, absolute doom. Even the dog trots around sniffing the wind like it's trying to file a complaint with management. You could consult the priest, but his only forecast is that sin rises when temperature falls. Not helpful, also definitely unscientific. When you finally stack the wood it looks tall until you remember how large a fire has to be to outmuscle a January wind. You toss a stick onto the pile, squint, and imagine it shrinking daily like a taper in an empty church. That mental exercise alone is enough to send you scrounging for dead branches like a squirrel on espresso. Autumn chores double as public theater. You knee-deep in cabbage, wrestling leaves into barrels for sauerkraut storage. Your neighbor smearing half the village's salt onto strips of pork belly in hopes the meat will keep until midwinter. Kids tying onions into braids that look less agricultural and more avant-garde art installation. Over it all hangs that unspoken math equation, provisions collected versus mouths fed multiplied by the unpredictable grudge Mother Nature will hold come February. You can feel numbers swirling above every household, a spectral abacus nobody's brave enough to inspect. The priest hosts a harvest blessing. It's supposed to reassure, but his voice echoes off stone walls so cold it sounds like God clearing his throat before a tragedy. You bow, mutter amen, and count the coins in your purse, one for the tithe, none for miracles. Heaven must run on a different economy. And just like that, frost bites a pumpkin. You touch the rind and your fingertip tingles. The night silence has changed pitch. Fewer crickets, more distant bark of a hungry fox. Fires get lit earlier now, but the smoke rises into a sky already spitting sleet. Whatever optimism you salvaged last spring creaks like a door hinge and falls off its frame. Still, you try a new tactic, jokes, because facing the cold without laughter is like facing a charging boar without a tree, foolish and fatal. Around the hearth you retell the story of Cousin Britha, who accidentally salted her laundry instead of the fish and spent half a season wearing pickled undergarments. Every time the punchline lands, you forget your knuckles hurt. For 2 heartbeats, nobody remembers the roof needs thatching, the oats need winnowing, and Uncle Gain never truly paid back that debt. Humor is your last barricade against despair, a rickety fence of chuckles strung across the wolf's path. But nights lengthen. You wake in darkness, labor in gloom, and return to a cottage lit by a candle so stubby it looks embarrassed to keep emitting light. A thin pale moon rises, projecting tree shadows that resemble lurking bandits. The goats sense the difference and refuse to leave the shed. You decide the goat has the right idea and consider joining it, purely for strategic warmth. Snow flurries arrive like scouts, testing your resolve. They dust the path, they cling under shingles, they melt just late enough to remind you that the real storm is loading its catapult behind the clouds. You breathe out and watch your own doubt freeze midair. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a wolf howls. It might be singing to the moon or tallying dinner options. Either way, you lay another log on the fire, kiss the good log goodbye and whisper the seasonal mantra one more time, not dead yet. That's all survival ever was here. One more breath shoved through chapped lips. One more sunrise you managed to witness. One more mug of lukewarm hope. The miracle isn't comfort, it's continuation. And as long as the cottage stands, as long as the stew pot doesn't crack, and as long as laughter finds a way to crawl through the smoke, you count the day a victory, even if the victory is measured in inches of living rather than miles. Tomorrow the first heavy snow will probably bury the fence and erase the road. Tomorrow the priest will remind everyone that suffering polishes the soul, as though your spirit needed extra shine. Tomorrow the neighbor may borrow a handful of firewood and return a decade late with excuses. Tomorrow, yes, but tonight the hearth is still glowing, the wolf is still outside, and you, small but stubborn as a clump of winter rye, are still inside, breathing, joking, surviving. Morning arrives disguised as blue-black twilight. No rooster crows. He tried once, inhaled a lungful of icicle air, and elected to take a vow of silence until April. You rouse yourself anyway, because dreams of toast have devolved into dreams of gnawing the table leg. The fire collapsed into sullen ash. You prod it with a stick that used to be part of a rake before winter repurposed gardening tools into kindling. A spark winks open, more apology than flame, and you feed it straw, then slivers, then the last respectable log. It flares like hope, then settles into a grudging glow. Outside, the world has been edited overnight. Fences erased, paths vanished, every surface corrected to pure white. Neighbors' roofs form identical sugarloaf mounds, so perfect you half expect a saint to dust them with cinnamon. The sky holds its breath, sound stops traveling. Step out and you are suddenly an intruder in a silent play about extinction. First duty, locate the livestock. The goat is exactly where you left it. Inside, glaring at the door, convinced you're about to evict it into Antarctica. The chickens, however, have staged a coup and refuse to exit the coop. You negotiate by shoveling snow with a dented skillet until a corridor appears, then scatter grain you can't spare while pretending this is generosity and not ransom. Fetching water becomes mountaineering. The well lid is fused shut under a lid of ice, thicker than last harvest's ledger. You chip, curse, chip harder. At last the bucket descends with a clunk, vanishes into blackness, then emerges wearing a crystal helmet. You haul it home, sloshing miniature glaciers onto your boots. By the time you reach the threshold, the surface has crusted again, because water enjoys comedic timing. Breakfast is yesterday's porridge, diluted with snowmelt and optimism. You flavor it by recalling a memory of honey. The children slurp without complaint. Their imagination supplies sugar, your pantry cannot. You pretend to sip yours slowly, so they won't notice your portion is smaller. Work divides like cells. One task splits into 2, then 4, until you can't recall why you first stood up. X the ice off the ladder rungs. Patch the roof hole the ice created. Chop extra wood, because patching cracked shingles costs heat you can't spare. Halfway through splitting logs, your breath drifts outward as rolling fog, and for a dizzy moment you realize you've contributed more cloud to the sky than the sky has given light today. Mid-afternoon, the priest trudges by delivering blessings, door to door like unsolicited mail. He blesses your cottage, your animals, your toes. You want to ask for a blessing on your woodpile, specifically a miracle of multiplication, but miracles are for Sundays and nobles. So you settle for the polite nod that means, "Thank you, please move along before your holy conversation consumes heat." Twilight returns early, creeping across the floor like a spill. Dinner is the stew again, now thickened to something between mortar and confession. You chew patiently, tasting thyme someone dropped in months ago, congratulating yourself on the sporadic complexity of flavor. A child asks if spring is tomorrow. You answer yes, because technically tomorrow is one day closer. Night deepens. Wind claws shingles, searching for moral weaknesses. You seal shutters with rags and prayers, then take inventory one more time. 7 skinny logs, half a barrel of oats, 3 onions debating retirement, 2 candles with ambition far exceeding their height, and the goat, which counts itself and bleats as though your arithmetic neglected its importance. The family settles like embers around the hearth. Stories begin, repetitions, exaggerations, anything to stretch consciousness until sleep ambushes. Someone recalls a summer fair from years ago. Someone else adds fireworks that probably never existed. Everyone agrees the meat pies were the finest ever baked, though no one tasted one. Embellishment is warmth that cost no wood. When the fire finally dips to orange whispers, you rake ashes over the last glowing buds, trying to tuck them in for the night like cranky children. Beds creak under collective weight. You curl beside the wall and feel straw poke your hip through the mattress sack. For a heartbeat, you marvel that a human body can ache in so many places while still functioning as a furnace for itself and 3 smaller bodies wedged against it. The wind outside moans a minor chord. You listen for wolf steps, for roof groans, for the unmistakable plop of snow dropping through that ceiling crack you meant to patch. Nothing happens yet. You breathe out, see your own sigh drift upward and fade, and close your eyes around the single stubborn thought that has carried every winter survivor since huts were invented. We're not dead tonight. Tomorrow the spark will need coaxing. The bucket will fight back. The stew will continue its geological evolution, and still you'll rise. Because survival isn't brave or noble, it's simply the only chore more persistent than snow. Sometime after midnight, well past the hour decent people have stopped negotiating with insomnia, the roof finally decides to test your last nerve. A chunk of snow congealed into something like a frozen muffin top, slides off the thatch and lands with a muffled whomp against the outside wall. Everyone jolts awake except the goat, who merely lifts an eyebrow as if noting your incompetence in soundproofing. You lie still, heart thudding, waiting to confirm whether the wall is about to fold inward like soggy parchment. Nothing else happens. The darkness settles again, slightly smug, while you stare at the rafters and recalibrate how much faith you have left in gravity. Eventually, morning grinds its gears. You'd call it sunrise, but the sun is still negotiating breach of contract terms. What you actually get is a dreary pewter glow, enough visibility to see your breath, but not enough to see the point. The children wake in cranky shifts, each one declaring hunger like it's breaking news. You consult the stew pot, now down to whatever dripped off last night's ladle, plus a few floating mysteries that could be herbs or could be the structural remains of the ladle itself. You add water, whisper an apology to flavor, and set it on the hearth, an alchemist distilling hope from tap water in inertia. Breakfast preparations attract the house cat, which has finally remembered its job description and deigns to present a freshly deceased rat at your feet. It looks pleased. You feel conflicted. On one hand, protein. On the other hand, squeamish children. You end up praising the cat lavishly, then discreetly burying the carcass outside while amusing yourself with the idea that the cat has simply subcontracted its hunt to the next snowmelt. You return, frost clinging to your eyelashes like cheap sequins, with the children occupied, aka gnawing warm porridge lumps that taste convincingly of nothing. You prepare for the day's main project, structural triage. The roof leak from last storm reappeared above the sleeping corner. Why is it always above the sleeping corner? So you climb the ladder, nails clenched between teeth like some discount carpenter hero. The wind slaps your face the moment your head clears the eaves, and you remember that hammering while shivering violates several unstated medieval safety codes. Even so, you wedge in new straw, smear a paste of mud and wool, and hope the house accepts your peace offering. Down below, the goat has taken hostage of your only broom. It's chewing the straw end with the determined expression of someone shredding evidence. You liberate the broom down 1/3 of its bristles and decide it's now a deluxe whisk. Adaptation becomes creativity when failure isn't an option. By midday, a distant jingling approaches. Most jingling means either a tinker, a tax collector, or marauders who enjoy festive acoustics. Today, blessedly, it's the peddler. He arrives bundled like a traveling bale of moss, pushing a cart laden with goods he swears are exotic but suspiciously resemble items pilfered from the last village. Still, he offers salt lumps, needles, a cracked mirror, and miracle of miracles, dried apple slices. You trade 2 onions and a promise to marry him off to your oldest daughter. He laughs. You pretend it's a joke. Your daughter sharpens a spoon behind you just in case. Business concluded. He departs, leaving behind rumors of an early thaw 50 miles south. 50 miles might as well be the moon. Afternoon chores blur, filling rabbit snares you never catch anything in, retwisting rope handles on the water bucket, and chasing the youngest child away from the indoor firewood stack, which apparently doubles as an obstacle course. At some point you realize your toes no longer hurt, an ominous sign they may have gone on strike. You warm them by the hearth until they resume a grudging tingle. Twilight seeps in again like spilled ink. You portion stew, now enlivened by 2 slivers of peddler apple and imagination. It tastes faintly of orchard memory. Everyone claims it's the best meal in weeks, and for once nobody is lying. You even allow yourself a thin mug of watered ale, lifting it like a king's goblet before the goat tries to sample it. After dinner there's rare entertainment. Your neighbor Olaf trudges over with his fiddle. The poor thing has only 3 strings left, but Olaf compensates by inventing notes that no known scale has requested. He saws out a jolly dirge. The children clap, the cat bolts. You tap your foot until the ice-crusted floorboard threatens to detach itself, then settle back, lulled by music that could be either folk heritage or a cry for help. It hardly matters. It's melody, and melody occupies the brain space where hunger likes to sit. Later, as the fire dwindles to a dim geometry of coals, you take inventory again. 5 logs, half-bucket flour, 1 apple slice, hidden behind a loose stone for an emergency tomorrow. The roof patch is holding. The children's coughs seem less hacking, more ordinary. The goat bristles indicate warmer weather, maybe a week away, according to no science whatsoever. You mark these minor blessings on the mental ledger against tragedies you've narrowly escaped so far. Before bed, you step outside to toss the dishwater. The night sky bristles with stars, cold sparks hammered into a velvet anvil. You exhale, watching your breath float upward, indistinguishable from mist rising off the snow. Somewhere in that black expanse is spring, trudging toward you at its own pace. You mutter a deal to the heavens, let the thaw arrive before the logs run out. No reply. Naturally, the sky has better things than customer service. Still, making the offer feels like action, and action keeps despair from nesting under your ribs. Inside, you wedge the last glowing coal deep under ash to coax dawn's fire. Everyone beds down. Children first, then the goat in its corner, then you, one more weary figure under patched blankets, smelling faintly of smoke, hope, and cat hair surprise. The roof murmurs but holds. The wind sniffs at cracks but moves on, unimpressed by your meager interior, and as eyelids finally surrender, you file the day away under not worst, which in this place and era is practically a festival category. Snow will fall again. Wolves will talk among themselves, but tonight you're inside, entire and against persuasive odds, almost warm. Survival grins in the dark, chalks up another win, and prepares tomorrow's rematch.
An hour before dawn, the goat declares a private apocalypse by knocking over the water bucket. You jolt awake to the unmistakable slosh of your entire morning spilling itself across the floorboards and sprinting toward the doorway like it just heard of a warmer climate. There's not much to salvage, but you mop the mess with the only towel left that is, the tunic you plan to wear to church, then wring it out over the hearth. The steam rises in disgruntled huffs, smelling faintly of goat breath and yesterday's dishwater. You add fix bucket handle again to the invisible scroll of chores that never stops unfurling inside your head. The day's gray light oozes through the parchment-covered window. You pull on boots turned to stone overnight and march outside to fetch snow you can melt back into today's drinking supply. Each shovel scoop squeals against the packed crust, announcing to any half-sleeping wolf that breakfast service is open. You work fast, breath pluming, nose numb past caring. By the time you've refilled the bucket and coaxed a flame under the pot, your eyelashes are beaded with tiny icicles so perfect they could decorate a noblewoman's chandelier if you were insane enough to let a noblewoman anywhere near your face. While the snow melts, you inspect the roof patch. It's holding, which feels like winning a game you didn't agree to play. You reward yourself by staring at the patch for a full 10 seconds, soaking in that fleeting burst of self-congratulation before the wind reminds you it will be back tonight to test your craftsmanship. Breakfast stew is down to liquid optimism flavored with onion peel, but you find a nugget of goat cheese hiding in the bottom of the storage crock. Scrape off the mold like you're carving marble and crumble it into the pot. Instantly, the whole shack smells cheekily of dairy and rebellion. The children perk up. Even the cat sits closer, pupils dilated like it's witnessing sorcery. Chores scatter everyone outward. 2 kids collect kindling nobody else wants to bend for. Another scours snow away from the privy path, so the night's visit won't involve spelunking. You take the axe into the woodlot, really a ragged copse of stunted birch, and consider which trunks look least offended by imminent decapitation. Swing, grunt, swing, curse, repeat. Each thudding strike sends shockwaves up your arms, vibrating hunger and resentment loose from your rib cage. Chips fly. You imagine they're silver coins. You imagine many things. Daydreaming is free and doesn't sap the firewood pile. Around noon, a dull sun creeps through cloud shreds, enough radiance for all of 5 degrees of warmth. You call the eldest to help drag new logs home on a makeshift sled, 2 fence rails lashed with rope salvaged from the broken spinning wheel. Together you haul them, a 2-person caravan of exhaustion, slipping on icy ruts until you reach the door. The goat greets you like a foreman inspecting substandard delivery. Afternoon brings sewing hour. The youngest pair of stockings are more whole than wool, so you unravel an old mitten for yarn. As you stitch, you tell an improvised tale about a knight who battled winter itself and won by refusing to stand still long enough to freeze. The children laugh at your ridiculous, dramatic voices. The goat looks unimpressed. The cat blinks in a silent, slow clap. Needlework becomes meditation. Pull, twist, tug, humor, repeat. Later, the wind swings round from the north, ushering squat, dark clouds. You can almost smell snow forming, that metallic hush the air adopts when it plots. You triple-check the shutters, wedge extra straw under the door gap, and stack 2 fresh logs by the hearth so nobody has to venture out in the night. When the swirling white arrives, it hits like flour dumped from heaven's cupboard, erasing the horizon in minutes. The kids press noses to the window cloth and gasp as if they've never seen snow before. You smile because at least they still find wonder in what mostly terrifies you. Evening porridge thickens nicely. Goat cheese was truly a morale upgrade, and neighbors drop in seeking warmth. Within moments, your hut becomes standing room only, a tiny congress of chapped faces radiating steam. Olaf brings his 3-string fiddle again, but tonight he surprises everyone by producing a bow strung with fresh horsehair. The resulting notes, while still suspicious of melody, at least sound less like furniture squeaking. Somebody starts an impromptu round dance that is 80% hopping in place to stay warm. Laughter cracks the ceiling dust loose. Snowstorm outside forgotten for a full half hour. When guests depart into the swirling dark, they leave behind echoes and the lingering scent of wet wool. You bank the fire, then slip outside to pee, because even chieftains of survival must answer certain calls. Snowflakes hit your face like soft sparks, and the night sky, though dark, no longer feels hostile. For a moment you stand still, letting icy crystals collect on your shoulders, and you realize you're humming Olaf's half-tune under your breath. It dawns on you that despite rationed bread, marauding wolves, and the universal tyranny of January, some piece of your heart remains stubbornly light.
Back inside, you nestle the embers, tuck children and goat under blankets, and wrap yourself in the patched quilt, whose stitches document every other winter you've endured. Outside, the wind sings around the eaves, high, lonely, and lawless, yet inside, the quiet feels earned, not imposed. You lie awake a few breaths longer, cataloging small blessings, a roof patch that stayed, a cheese crust that existed, a neighbor's fiddle that almost tuned. These fragments assemble into something stronger than walls, warmer than coals, the growing conviction that tomorrow you'll manage again. Eventually, sleep drifts over you, gentle as falling ash. Wolves may sniff the perimeter, the church may demand penance, taxes and obedience, and firewood may dwindle like the moon, but tonight you have held the line. Somewhere deep in your dreams, a sunlit meadow unfurls, defiantly green. Spring is a story you keep telling yourself, like a favorite folktale with a guaranteed ending. You cling to that narrative in the same way you grip the axe, firmly, purposefully, splinters be damned. Because here, surviving winter isn't optimism, it's proof of your own relentless rewrite. One frigid paragraph at a time, you wake to an unfamiliar sound, drip, drip, drip. The roof playing a watery tambourine. Overnight, the snowbank wedged against the south wall bred a lattice of icicles, and now they're surrendering, droplet by droplet. The first true thaw never arrives with trumpets. It tiptoes in, dribbling, mocking your buckets until the floor shines like a mirror for exactly 3 minutes before turning back into mud. Still, you grin like a fool because liquid water falling from above instead of freezing everywhere feels illegal in February. Out you march, boots squelching where yesterday they crunched. The goat follows, sniffing at patches where the white has retreated, nibbling brownish stubble with all the enthusiasm of a gourmand discovering nouvelle cuisine. The hens waddle into the slop, immediately complain and retreat, but you swear one of them dropped an egg right there in the muck, a rubbery little miracle. You scoop it up reverently, cradle it as if it contains the very blueprint for spring itself. The air changes color first, an almost invisible tint of warmth mixed with thawing manure. It's not lovely, but it's alive. You inhale and cough again, then laugh, because coughing without frost smoke feels exotic. Around noon, the sun actually remembers its job description. It climbs a full hand span above the tree line, throwing timid heat that coaxes steam from the cottage roof. You stand in its beam like a cat in a doorway, eyes half-lidded, daring not to blink in case it changes its mind. With the thaw comes inventory revision. Yesterday you counted 5 logs and half a barrel of flour. Today you count 5 logs, half a barrel, and the sudden possibility you might not need a 6th log tonight. The children overhear you mumbling this math and burst into debate over which taste bud still works. They insist the stew seemed brighter today. You humor them and pretend optimism has a flavor. Neber Olaf trundles over, fiddle tucked beneath his arm, eyes shining with unspoken news. He reports that a stream near his plot flowed enough to show stones. Running water, he whispers, like he's describing treasure. He demonstrates on his fiddle, 3 strings vibrating a bouncy tune that practically smells of mud and crocuses. You join by banging the stew ladle on the rim of a dented pot, percussion for the great thaw, and soon children are spinning in lopsided circles, their wool capes flaring like drunken butterflies. That night you leave a corner of the shutter cracked and let the scent of damp earth seep inside. The fire burns lower, willingly this time as if it too is exhausted from having played guardian all winter. The blankets feel lighter. In the hush before sleep, you catch the faintest gurgle of ice loosening in the well, a subterranean cheer you decide to take personally. Winter will rear its head again. One final snow squall always arrives just when peas are sprouting. Wolves will still prowl, priests will still sermonize about humility, and taxes will still pretend they're divinely ordained. But tonight damp air kisses your cheek instead of biting it, and that single egg you rescued waits near the hearth, promising breakfast that might not taste exclusively of melted snow. You close your eyes already drafting tomorrow's impossibly ambitious to-do list. Scrape slush, search for nettle tips, inspect the plow blade, maybe whistle while working just to rub spring's arrival in winter's frostbitten face. None of it is guaranteed, but for the first time in months the ground beneath your dreams is softening, and that is enough. 2 mornings later the egg is history scrambled with a celebratory pinch of salt, and divvied into fractions so microscopic they qualify as theoretical particle cuisine. No one complains. Each bite tastes like deliverance. Afterward the children spend half an hour describing the flavor to the goat who blinks in righteous envy. True thaw doesn't bother with neat scheduling. It lunges forward, stumbles back, then finally commits. A southerly wind barges in, tossing roof thatch like a tavern brawler rearranging furniture. You seize the chance to fling open every shutter, letting stagnant winter smoke pour out and fresh air surge through. Instantly the cottage smells less like damp wool and more like, well, slightly less damp wool. Progress. The ground outside morphs into an alchemical sludge, equal parts mud, manure, and melted dreams. Each step produces a sound best described as bog gargle. Still, you wade out because today you're on a mission. Locate the first edible greens. Nettles spear skyward beside the compost heap, their stingers humming malicious challenges. You glove up with rags, snip them fast, and march triumphantly home, clutching a bundle of what is basically pain salad. Boiled, it will taste mostly like boiled water, but with vitamins, actual vitamins, and a lingering burn that reminds you of your own recklessness. While nettles simmer, you craft the inaugural spring checklist. Mend fence, clean chimney creosote before it fossilizes, coax plow blade back to sharpness, reseat the wobbly bench that tried to assassinate Uncle Gain. You also schedule an imaginary holiday called Blanketless Day, currently projected for mid-June, depending on whether summer remembers the address this year. Neighbors gather near the thawing road to gossip about signs. Olaf swears he saw two crows courting instead of bickering, a matrimonial omen clearly. Widow Rilke brandishes a snowdrop bloom, proof that saints still answer prayers. The priest, not to be outdone, declares every harbinger a reward for steadfast piety and tithing. Everyone nods, deciding not to mention last week's semi-pagan chant they all hum to encourage the sun. With soil softening, you break ground for early peas, each seed a tiny promissory note you bury like treasure. The children squeal over earthworms, ambassadors of fertility wriggling through gloom. You instruct them gently, never waste a worm, never mock the weather, and never feed the goat your mitten again. They solemnly agree to 2 out of 3. Nights remain cold, but the fear has shifted pitch. Instead of worrying whether the fire will die, you worry whether the roof will leak onto your sprouting seedlings. You let embers fade sooner, trusting blankets and shared body heat. Every dusk you lie down exhausted in that delicious way that comes from honest physical toil rather than desperate survival twitches. You almost miss the adrenaline of winter. Almost. A fortnight later you witness the first thunderstorm. It rolls in like a rowdy caravan, booming across the valley, drumming rain so hard the mud rejoices by leaping onto your shins. Lightning splits the horizon. You count heartbeats until thunder cracks, just for the thrill of proving you still can. The downpour overflows buckets, floods the goat's favorite napping hollow, and rinses 5 months of soot from the chimney stones. When it passes, the world smells rinsed and strangely new, like God decided to mop. In the calm that follows, you spot a rainbow faint as a rumor. The children shriek and chase its tail into a meadow, convinced there's treasure. Technically there is. Countless tufts of wild herbs bursting free, glistening in fresh sunlight. You harvest handfuls, the first aromatic joy after winter's monotone stew. Rosemary, maybe, or some cousin that merely smells hopeful. Either way, it's going in tonight's pot. Consequences be damned. Evenings now feature twilight so prolonged it feels generous. Olaf's fiddle gains a 4th string, salvaged horsehair courtesy of the blacksmith's mare, and for the first time a melody emerges that doesn't sound like 2 cats debating philosophy. You tap your toes and notice they no longer ache from frostbite ghosts. The cat returns to duties, depositing a neatly decapitated vole at Olaf's foot in what can only be interpreted as fan appreciation. The priest, sensing resurgence of mortal cheer, schedules a parish feast for Pentecost. Everyone contributes. Widow Rilke offers pickled beets, Olaf donates a suspicious jug of apple tonic, and you supply a loaf containing more flour than last year's entire stock thanks to a mild harvest tax remission. The feast is modest by noble standards but legendary to your taste buds. Someone even produces a drum of honey, which drizzles over oatcakes like liquid sunrise. You watch children lick sticky fingers, sun setting crimson behind them, and realize you're smiling so wide it hurts. Late that night, lying on straw that now feels almost comfortable, you take reckoning. Winter tried its best, gnawed at your pantry, howled down the chimney, recruited wolves for backup, but you're still here. You patched, chopped, boiled, bled, bargained, prayed, and occasionally laughed. That laugh is important. It's proof. Tomorrow new problems will sprout with the peas, weeds, pests, an overdue tithe, maybe a late frost attempting one last sucker punch. But tonight you rest with windows cracked to let in cool damp air that no longer threatens. You listen, not for wolves, not for roof groans, but for frogs croaking down at the marsh, their song a raucous declaration that the earth flipped its seasonal switch and life restarted.
You drift off imagining next winter's firewood stacked taller than ever, the roof finally rethatched with proper reeds, a cellar crowded with jars of preserved summer. Dreams are free. And if reality delivers only half, that's still twice what you had last year. Somewhere in those dreams the goat achieves legendary status, the priest discovers smiling doesn't cause heresy, and Olaf's fiddle grows a fifth string, one that stays in tune. But no matter what, you mud-covered, smoke-scented, impossibly stubborn wake again, greet the dawn and do the work. Because survival in any century is just another word for relentless hope. Your eyes snap open at the rosy hour birds use to gossip, well before the sun has finished combing its hair, and for a fleeting glorious moment you almost forget to dread anything. Summer is leaning on the doorframe now, not fully inside, but bold enough to track fresh mud across the threshold. The breeze carries warm hints of hay and manure, which in these parts is the olfactory equivalent of champagne. You fling the shutter wider and inhale until your ribs creak like old pews. Somewhere beyond the fields a lazy cuckoo clocks its hourly complaint, and you decide that's close enough to a positive omen. First chore of the true warm season is unearthing the tools that spent winter sulking in the corner like disgraced knights. The scythe blade, last used as an ice scraper, glowers under a blanket of rust. You bribe it back to life with fistfuls of sand, vigorous whetstone whisperings, and a heartfelt promise you'll clean it properly this year. A lie so familiar you both smile. Meanwhile, the plow is discovered half buried beneath a bale of moldy straw, its handles cracked like parched lips. You splint them with willow twigs and faith, two materials peasants use interchangeably. Fields call. Wheat seedlings are knee-high, a green ocean rippling under sunbeams sharp enough to slice bread. You tramp the furrows and perform the nerve-jangling arithmetic of pests versus yield. There's already evidence of weevils forming a union, and the crows hold strategic roundtable meetings on the fence posts. You respond with a scarecrow assembled from Uncle Gaines' discarded tunic, a broken rake handle, and the goat's most judgmental expression. The crows applaud your creativity, then hold their conference under its armpit. Haymaking season arrives like a boot sale with mandatory attendance. You and every able neighbor swing scythes in synchronized misery, cutting swaths so wide even the priest stops to admire the accidental geometry. The sun bakes your neck until it's weathered enough to qualify as new roofing material. Every few hours Olaf cranks out a sweaty jig on his fiddle, now miraculously sporting that fifth string just so morale doesn't plummet through the topsoil. The children gallop around gathering stray stalks, half helping, half inventing a game where points are awarded for stuffing hay down siblings' shirts. You let them. Itchy laughter beats moody silence. Evening brings the hayrick challenge, stacking dried grass into a heap stable enough to survive rogue winds and wild pigs who treat hayricks like personal trampolines. Everyone has a system. Widow Rilke packs hers tight as a bishop's sermon. You prefer the optimistic flop and hope method. Both collapse at least once before supper. Eventually though, ricks stand tall, tottering green ziggurats shadowing the village, promising feed for livestock and itchy nightmares in equal measure. Post-hay respite lasts precisely 3 days before harvest mania begins. Grains ripen overnight, turning golden like coins freshly minted by sunfire. You test kernels with your teeth, declare them divine, and rally the crew at dawn. Sickles flash, sheaves stack, and shouts ricochet across the fields, half triumph, half curses at thistles disguised as wheat clumps. The goat patrols the perimeter, tasting every drop stalk, automatically charging a processing fee. The manor steward eventually saunters out to measure your stacks, accompanied by a ledger thicker than last winter's snowpack. He tallies the Lord's share, the church's tithe, and the intangible miscellaneous dues, which appear suspiciously elastic whenever your yield looks healthy. You cough up grain in bushels until the steward's mule groans under its sacks. Surprisingly, you don't feel cheated. Merely relieved the mare's hindquarters now block his view of the remaining pile, you've cunningly disguised behind a fence panel painted to look like slightly taller grass. With granaries filling and cider starting to bubble in barrels, spirits rise, village festivals sprout like mushrooms after rain. First comes St. Swithin's Fair, featuring contests such as longest turnip toss and competitive gossip, the latter judged by how far a rumor travels before sundown. You enter the turnip toss, underhand lob a specimen older than the church door, and accidentally strike the steward's ledger, scattering parchments like migrating geese. The crowd loses its collective mind. For 10 heartbeats, your folk hero famous. Night fairs are the best, torchlit alleys of barrel organs wheezing dance tunes, traders hawking charms guaranteed to repel next winter's frost. and a baker selling honey cakes so sweet they could ransom a small thief. You devour one, burning your tongue on molten syrup, then chase it with ale served in a horn roughly as long as your forearm. Civic proof that after months of rationed broth, gluttony can masquerade as patriotism. Autumn tiptoes back wearing Bollywood-colored leaves. You swear last winter ended yesterday, but here comes the cycle's grindstone already. This time though, you have reinforcements. A hayrick sturdy as a fortress, barrels brimming with cider vinegar strong enough to bench-press scurvy, and that roof patch you finally reinforced with cedar shakes borrowed from the steward's repair stockpile. The goat even birthed twins, adorable duplicates of chaos brimming with potential milk and new ways to sabotage the pantry. One afternoon while salting down sides of pork, you catch yourself humming Olaf's sprightly tune and realize your shoulders are loose, your belly is full, and the future seems less like a looming ambush and more like a slightly irritable pen pal. You still fear the gray jaws of January, but fear now shares headspace with confidence built on stacked grain, sealed jars, and laughter stored like firewood. Winter will return, of course. But when it bangs on the door this time, it'll find you waiting with a bigger pile of logs, thicker jokes, and 3 goats braced in the entryway as furry security guards. Night settles crisp but not cruel. Stars flicker overhead like coin sparks. You lean against the warm timber of the granary, sip a final gulp of cider, and watch your breath drift upward, not as fog of worry but as a toast. Here's to another loop around the wheel, to relentless hope, to peasants stubborn as oak roots. Let the snow try its worst. Let the wolves rehearse their opera in the dark. You're ready to rewrite the story once more, paragraph by paragraph, punchline by punchline, through the blunt seasons of medieval life and come out laughing. The leaves turn brittle, flickers of brass under your boots, and suddenly every bee in the valley remembers where you live. It's honey harvest time, and for 3 stinging afternoons you reenact a slow-motion duel with an entire apiary. The hives wedged in the hollow of a lightning-splintered oak have been smoking gently since dawn thanks to a bundle of damp moss you wave around like an inept censor. Bees swirl in tiny golden tempests, appraising your fumbling hands as though you're auditioning to be stung. You pry open a comb shimmering with amber and drip it into a clay pot while chanting any saint name that comes to mind. Saint Ambrose, Saint Bungled Finger, Saint Please Don't Let Me Die from Swelling. By dusk the pot is nearly full and your face resembles a poorly stitched quilt, but you've captured summer in syrup thick enough to bribe angels. Back home you unveil the honey like a relic. Children dip blunt spoons, the goat attempts headfirst immersion. You save a ribbon's worth for the priest's upcoming candle-making drive, wax and honey traded for an official indulgence that promises to shave, allegedly 3 days off purgatory. You find that math suspicious but figure it can't hurt to prepay. Candle season means the cottage reeks of boiling tallow for a week, every surface slick with greasy optimism. Strips of linen twist into wicks, you dunk them repeatedly until enough layers form a stubby cylinder that even the church mice respect. One candle mold cracks mid-dip, splattering molten fat across the cat's tail. It vanishes yowling into the rafters, re-emerging hours later smelling like a roasted partridge and wearing an expression that could sour milk. Alongside candles you tackle leatherwork, mending the strap that holds the water bucket, patching boots so thin they qualify as sandals, stitching a new scabbard from a rabbit pelt because the old one moldered into abstract art. You are simultaneously tailor, cooper, smith, and occasional philosopher. On clear evenings you test your handiwork by stomping around the yard as if auditioning for a very small army. The neighbors applaud, or maybe they're just keeping rhythm while pounding flax. Rumor seeps in on wagon wheels. Bandits have been sighted 2 valleys over, sporting mismatched helmets and trading stolen grain for cheap wine. You polish the family pitchfork, not that a pitchfork ever genuinely intimidates anyone, but at least it sparkles menacingly in moonlight. Beside it you place the good chopping axe and a bucket of particularly irritable chickens, the medieval version of a home security system. Days shorten, each dawn now arrives with the smell of damp leaf rot and the chill of an unspoken threat. You butcher the surplus rooster, traitorous insomniac, and hang strips of meat above the hearth, smoke curling into the thatch where spiders are already knitting winter pajamas. The children complain the smoke stings their eyes. You remind them it's either smoke now or frostbite later. They vote for smoke and learn to blink through it like seasoned chimney sweeps. Markets shift to bartering season. At the Michaelmas fair you trade a skein of yarn and a half jar of honey for 2 whetstones and a hand-me-down cloak promising 3 extra winters of shoulder coverage. The merchant insists it once belonged to a scribe, judging by the ink stains you suspect it belonged to a goose, but it's warm and warmth is an argument-ending currency. The steward visits unexpectedly with parchment proclamations about a new road toll to fund bridge repairs. No one remembers a bridge near the village, but tolls are like rain, they fall whether needed or not. You pay in cider barrels diluted enough to pass as vinegar. The steward, nose wrinkled, writes something in his ledger that probably translates to never accept drinks from this hovel again. You consider that a victory. At night frost jewels the window edges. You restuff mattresses with fresh straw scented faintly of last summer's meadow. Today's luxury, tomorrow's allergen. The goat's twins graduate from reckless bouncing to full-time roof climbing. Their hooves clatter overhead like auditioning ghosts until you bribe them down with carrot tops. The priest invites villagers to a vigil for the health of fields and souls. You attend, mostly for warmth, partly for rumor swapping. Someone whispers that the miller's wife was seen dancing barefoot by moonlight, and someone else counters she was stomping grapes for communion wine. Either way, the priest dedicates an extra prayer to stamping out wild pagan impulses, then passes the basket for donations, which the congregation fills with copper scraps, 3 walnuts, and a deflated bladder ball. He sighs, blesses it, and announces a fast day to cleanse everyone's conscience. You nod piously while mentally cataloging your secret stash of dried apples. On the appointed fast day, you toil from dawn to dusk splitting logs, the growl in your stomach sinking with each axe strike. Evening arrives, and the priest strolls by sniffing for cooking smells. You have cleverly simmered nettle broth, technically liquid, technically penitential. The moment his silhouette vanishes, you crumble a goat cheese scrap into bowls. The children hiss giggles. You pardon their souls on the spot, confident God wouldn't begrudge calcium. Weeks slip like ice from slanted roofs. You secure the final thatch bundle, stoke the first true winter fire, and feel the year cork itself shut. Yet your heart no longer flutters at every creak. The granary is snug, the hayloft bursting, the candle hoard thick as barley. The pitchfork stands ready, the goat twins look plump enough to outhop a hungry wolf, and Olaf's fiddle keeps 5 strings in tune 5 days in a row, a sure sign the cosmos is aligned more kindly than last year. Snow arrives eventually, quiet as a confession, but when it mounds against the door you just shovel, whistle, maybe even smile. Because this time winter isn't an ambush, it's an opponent you've studied. You've mapped its weak spots, stacked logs, sealed gaps, hidden honey. You've barricaded despair with jokes, patched fear with goat-curdled optimism. It will still howl, still freeze, still take what it can, but it won't take everything. Not while you're armed with relentless hope, a steaming bowl of clandestine stew, and a roof patched with the memory of sun-blown hay.
In the hush before sleep, you glance at the fire. Watch sparks whirl upward like copper fireflies, and you whisper a prophecy to the rafters. I will outlast you again. The rafters, seasoned by storms and stories, creak back what might just be agreement.